Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, where we bring you the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. As is now traditional for the first episode in a new series of the podcast, we invite Tobias Federico, a leading analyst at Montel. We will talk about the upcoming German election, our favourite word, Dunkelflaute, and the prospects of the same happening this year, Elon Musk's favourite German political party, and what a Trump presidency means for energy markets across the globe. But before we talk to Tobias, setting the stage for today's discussion is Katharina Johannsen, Montel's Berlin correspondent, who will provide insights into the context of Germany's current energy landscape. So, Katharina, what are the most burning energy issues in Germany at the moment?
Hi, Richard. I'm very excited to be here in your podcast. For the most burning topics at the moment, I think the energy sector clearly faces some challenges with negative prices. So, for last year, we've seen most negative prices we've ever had. And it clearly brings some of new projects towards a zone where it's questionable whether they're profitable or not. So there is some danger whether new projects are able to find enough financial means. And I think this is something that needs to be solved politically. And it's one of the topics that could still find legislation before we have the new elections. And other than that, of course, we face the elections at the end of February, and then we will see what kind of things will change afterwards.
So, Katharina, you're in the hotbed of German politics, which is Berlin. And what do you think is at the top of politicians' agenda in the Germany's capital city?
Well, I think certainly negative prices or volatility, the so-called Dunkelflaute, also high prices during the times we don't have renewables production. That went through media a lot, so it is on the agenda. And I think overall, there are a lot of industrial consumers and households that worry about high energy prices, and all the parties have said that they want to lower energy prices. They're some of the things that they have proposed are very similar. And then certainly we need to find a way of how do we want our capacity mechanism, what it should look like in the future, and the power plant strategy, the first 10.5 gigawatts of power plants, H2-ready power plants that should come in the market somehow in some tenders. Then the CDU opposition party have also said they want to look more into nuclear power and don't take any power plants, coal power plants, out the market anymore before we don't have new gas power plants. So that's sort of the political landscape I would see.
Excellent, Katharina. I'm sure we'll go into all these factors into much more detail, but thank you so much for setting the scene for today's podcast.
Thank you.
So a warm welcome to you, Tobias. It's great to have you back on the podcast in our traditional start of the year, the official episode.
Thank you, Richard. And I just realized it's our 7th season of this podcast.
Wow. And it's been great to have you in every series. To have you on the podcast, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on board. So, and with your insights about Germany, I think if we start, so we've got these important elections looming in a few weeks' time. Let's sort of focus on, why the government broke up. And was energy a factor in why that dissolved?
Well, yes, it did. There was an official statement from Olaf Scholz, from our chancellor, that high energy prices have been a dispute for breaking up between the Street Coalition and the yellow part of it, which are the liberals. But we do also see some personal issues between the strong personality of Christian Lindner and the strong personality of Olaf Scholz. But nevertheless, the discussion has been around spending the governmental budget for the year 2025, and energy was definitely a topic on that. So yes, it was not the main reason, but it has been touched for the breakdown of this coalition.
And what, looking at the election in February, what are the main energy policy issues on the agenda?
Well, first of all, we've seen that Germany was quite strong in the green energy transition. The main definition of the green energy transition in Germany was increasing the growth of fluctuating renewables in combination with some backup capacities. They have been planned to be mostly gas-driven by Russian gas. And with the war in the Ukraine, we just realized that didn't really happen. Which means then that we needed to have a power plant strategy for backup capacities. But that law didn't pass with the old government. And now with the breakup, it's not likely it will pass until February. So that is one point. And we see especially that all the ambitious growth we had regarding the transportation grid for electricity, regarding the hydrogen grid, the core hydrogen grid, as we call it in Germany, that there will be a lot of governmental spending. We see that it became too much in spending money in total. Which means then that the new government will focus on reducing somehow the spending cost. I say somehow because, of course, now we have the political election campaigns where they promise everything. But when we break it down to certain developments, we will see a few changes there, but not that radical what is going to be promised now during the election period.
So that's one aspect, this gas or this power plant strategy. That's often, that didn't pass. It hopefully it will pass in February. But what does that mean in detail? These are basically, I think, about 10 gigawatts of gas-fired, or should we say hydrogen-ready gas-fired plants. That's also a little bit controversial maybe. But that's basically around 10 or 11 gas-fired plants that Germany plans to build. Is that realistic?
Not in the time frame we are giving. We must bring this in a bit of a broader perspective. Germany wanted to become quite carbon neutral. Gas should have been, or natural gas should have been the bridge technology. What was quite clear on the phase out of nuclear energy. What was quite clear is the phase out of coal. Here we have been shifting a bit between the year 2038, 2030, 2032. But it was somehow clear that if our electricity supply system is based on fluctuating renewable, we do need backup capacities. And these new backup capacities coming to the system have been missing somehow, especially because we see that we have a missing money problem, more or less.
Can you explain that, Tobias?
A missing money problem is that if you want to build up backup capacities of based on conventional technologies, irregardless whether that's a green hydrogen-fired or natural gas-fired power plant, you are calculating your financial based on the runtime hours of that power plant. But on a market where we are mostly weather-driven, we strongly depend on the situation where God sends us the fuel, meaning that how much wind and solar will be there. And you cannot bet on a steady cash flow return because there might be a winter where you earn a little money because you're not producing so much. And there might be other winters where you earn a lot of money with your conventional power plant. Having securities for investors to invest into conventional power plants has raised the need of a different market design. Meaning that we have been thinking about a capacity market mechanism, which gives security to the investors. That was the power plant strategy, and that is missing right now. What is clear is that we still phase out conventional power plants, and we might be missing some backup capacities. And we've seen the first glimpse this year with the extreme high price spikes in the so-called Dunkelflaute.
We've talked about that a lot on this podcast, don't you worry, Tobias? Yeah, there's a great German word that's now entered into the English vernacular, I say, or certainly within the energy markets. So that's what we can see happening without gas plants. But, there are several obstacles here, aren't they? First of all, the financing. then the building. So, the most realistic that this backup capacity come online is, early 2030s?
Yeah, I would say the likelihood is quite low to come early 2030, honestly, because it takes another 3 to 5 years. And there are not any projects around right now. Maybe a few, but I don't see them. Maybe I missed them too. But nevertheless, we have the security of phasing out coal and the insecurity of new power plants. And that is a topic in the elections. And I bet that the new government, which will be mostly CDU-driven, will refocus on certain technologies, but still being climate neutral, meaning that it's quite likely that they rethink the coal phase out, that they postpone that. But then we have an issue becoming climate neutral. So that's why I think at least a thought and maybe also a step up in carbon capture and storage approaches for conventional fuels or conventional power plant technologies will be part of the election campaign and will also be part of the energy policy in the upcoming years.
So is what's being talked about at the moment in terms of, an election manifesto? It's probably too early to talk about that. But what's on the table? How is the CDU and the CSU portraying itself as different from what went before?
Well, by coincidence, just one day before the government breakdown, the CDU has released at least the energy strategy. And this is quite likely to become also part of the energy campaign, which then mostly is focusing on reducing energy costs for the industrial sector to keep up economic growth or to repick economic growth. It's the third year of a recession for Germany, which never has happened before after World War II. So, which means then reduced grid fees for the industrial sector, maybe somehow reduced energy prices without having subsidies. So that is one thing. The other thing is really that we will go away from restricting certain technologies. So avoiding gas power plants or at least what's right now, carbon capture and storage for non-fossil fuel, that's allowed. So for biomass, we can do carbon capture and storage, which really doesn't make a lot of sense from my personal opinion. But opening that then for coal and lignite power plants. So that's in their manifesto. There's another thing which is not so wholesale energy market related, which is the law for household heating. The German word is quite long, the Gebäudeenergiegesetz, which is basically the law for household heating, which oblige you to have, if there is no district heating available, 65% of renewable energies in your house, which in the end is the death or the end of this local gas-fired burners and heaters in the home. And the only way you could replace it today is by heat pumps. And that has been a long dispute on household owners, which is around about 10 million households. We have our houses, single home households in Germany, which is around about 20 million voters. And they have been very unhappy about that. So that's something that will be definitely unwinded, but it's much more retail focused.
But that's also an issue in other parts of Europe as well, certainly in the UK, this heat pump issue. There's been, you can talk about a backlash against heat pumps, against boilers, standard gas boilers, and whether there's been a certified or specific targeted campaign against the heat pumps is that's what some people will say. I'm not sure that's the case, but certainly that is an issue. Then you think in the election,
definitely, and it will be an election driver. Plus, I think they will focus on, let's say, I call it voting campaign topics, which might collect some type of voters, which is first restarting the rethinking of nuclear energy.
Are you serious?
Well, we are still restarting to rethink. We are not restarting our nuclear power plant. I think they are going to keep this open, that discussion. This is one thing. And the other thing is in Germany, we had the energy feed-in law, the EEG, which basically is the difference between the feed-in tariff and the wholesale electricity market prices. Since a few years, this is paid out of the state budget and not a transfer fee from the end users. And these costs are increasing currently, because of course the wholesale markets are decreasing somehow, especially due to the cannibalization effect, the capture rate, which gives a high burden onto the governmental budget. And that is another voting promise that they're going to reduce these EEG costs, but they can't do at a quick win. It takes years to reduce those costs because we have the feed-in tariff guaranteed for 20 years. And the big boom of renewables we had, especially in solar panels, were in the year 2008. So we will see a significant decrease in the EEG cost after the year 2028.
I think I'd like to return to a number of those topics, Tobias, especially the industrial sector and then the election as well, because a certain electric car manufacturer in the States has come. We can look at what's happening in Germany in terms of prices. You talk about cannibalization, where there is a massive prices down and hits profits, hits revenues, and also hits investors in the long term, or short to medium term anyway. If we were to say, so we've got that situation on the one side when there's an abundance of wind or sun, but yet when there isn't any wind or sun and it's the Dunkelflaut we're talking about, we see prices spike to extremes. What are your expectations for 2025, Tobias? What is this something that's going to continue?
Yes. No, it has been always expected somehow. I don't know why it comes as a surprise for most of the market participants. Years ago, we've been speaking about the electricity prices with that expected growth rate of fluctuating renewables, and missing backup capacities will lead to binary electricity price. Or, so it's a cold Dunkelflaute. Then we are having extreme prices, and that's binary, either or. Of course, we have a situation in between, but that's increasing volatility. And honestly, that also increases market opportunities for a few participants. Flexible demanders, battery storage system. We see a huge growth in battery storage systems due to that. But that is a, let's say, short-term backup and not a long-term backup.
So Toby, I mean, you have these periods of extremely low prices, and the as you mentioned, the cannibalization effect. Surely that's an incentive for operators of battery energy storage systems, or BESS as they're sometimes called, to enter the market, and they could maybe come online much quicker than a gas-fired plant could.
Yeah, we see. I wouldn't say a hype. The hype is negative, but we see a huge growth in battery energy storage systems. Especially because the business case has shifted a bit. In the past, we saw battery capacities coming to the market, which was 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt. Right now, we are speaking about 100, 120, 200 megawatt capacities. And the interesting part is their main focus is not on the regulatory ancillary services part, so the FCR market, but rather on the intraday market price volatility and on the day-ahead market price volatility. So this high price volatility will lead also to new players, which can handle flexibility.
I mean, that's very interesting. And now I want to return to, talking about the election that's coming up. We've sort of started talking about the election. I want to come back to it. And there's a lot been in the media about the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD. Do you expect them to have play a role potentially in the next German government? I know that Elon Musk is certainly a fan, but is the German population?
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, if we look into the current voting tests, I don't know whether this is the right word. They are the second strongest party. Right, directly following after the CDU, far before the Green Party and the Social Democrats. And of course, it's those type of politicians always try to find simple answers to complex problems. And that is a certain similarity which we see between certain US car manufacturers, Donald Trump, and definitely this party. And they try to provide simple answers, whose fault and what we are going to avoid. And I mean, these 20% does not come from somewhere. I mean, it's almost 20% as far as I know. So part of the German population, driven by a lot of high insecurity, are looking for answers, help. It sounds a bit weird because I'm definitely not a fan of that party because it imposes a lot of danger. But nevertheless, it provides simple answers. And currently, I think this is a general movement in Europe, maybe also worldwide, that we have the tendency to giving simple answers to the increasing complexity of today's world.
And it's a more of a sort of populist backlash against what's, the world's increasing in complexity, and people, like you say, they want simple answers that they can easily understand. Whether that's true or not seems to be irrelevant at the moment. But what do they stand for, electorally in terms of energy? Because I spoke recently to some Italian colleagues in a video I did, and they said, the guy said wind energy has become centre left and nuclear has become right wing. I mean, does that hold for Germany?
Yes. Well, yeah, I would say so. If I would summarize that from those nationalists, as the name says, focusing on national energy sources, and security. And it seems somehow that nuclear energy seems to be quite national, which is absolutely wrong, but nevertheless. So, of course, pushing nuclear energy, looking into local resources, but especially the AfD, together with the far left party in Germany, that's quite interesting. They are a very big fan of Putin. So they are really focusing on restarting gas deliveries from Russia and then using gas for the main fuel source in Germany. So somehow you have to this focus back on national power, but still relying on strong partners. In this case, especially the AfD, it seems to be Russia.
That's very interesting. I mean, you see in certain parts of Europe, French power for French people, and in Norway, it's like cut the cables to neighbors because it should be, cheap power for Norwegians. And is that also a discussion in Germany?
Well, not really, because Germany is not that isolated somehow. We have a lot of interconnection with other countries. We are rather focusing on national fuels. By the way, I think fluctuating renewable energy is national, but that's another discussion. That's a fact. So cutting cables, it's not definitely an issue. It's rather increasing cables to France because they have reliable nuclear energy. At least that's the argument from the AfD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's your gut feeling, for late February? What's going to happen in terms of what kind of government can Germany expect to have, and what impact will that have on the energy market in the country?
Well, most likely, I think we are going to have a so-called Great Coalition led by the CDU together with the Social Democrats. On the other hand, maybe Olaf Scholz is picking up a few votes, and then it will be also a great coalition, mostly led then by the Social Democrats. I think the Greens are most likely out if the CDUs are driven. They are not really compatible. The Liberals might not get into the whole voting system because they are below the so-called 5% level threshold. And for the BSV, which is the new far left party, they are decreasing right now currently. Nobody is going to have a coalition together with the AfD. So it's most likely to have a great coalition. And then it's most likely that we'll have this economic focus driven energy policy, which is open for new technology or for other technologies, not new technologies, which means carbon capture and storage for hydrocarbons.
Interesting. But the nuclear discussion, you say the restarting, the rethinking, but are we going to get anywhere along the lines where they're rethinking again?
No. Well, it's their restarting, rethinking. They might write a concept paper, and it's not within this legislation period. And I don't think at all that Germany will ever restart nuclear power plants. I
mean, I'm not an engineer, but I also heard it's too late or would be massively expensive as well.
Yeah, and we see that nuclear power plants, even though they seem to be very reliable during the production time, the total cost, not mentioning Hinkley Point C or the Finnish power plant, which name I always forgot.
Olkiluoto 3. It's a tricky one. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Yeah.
No, but nevertheless, we see that the total investment costs are quite high, which means then in the end, no, we'll not do it.
I mean, there's another important election. We've seen an important election with a new president of the United States coming into power in January. if we talk sort of global geopolitical factors here, Tobias, how will that drive, the energy markets? How will the imposition of Trump president, what will that mean for European energy markets?
Well, it's definitely a surprise package. Yeah, I mean, it's what he recently has said regarding Panama Canal renaming the Gulf of Mexico into Gulf of America, Greenland. It's crazy things are really happening there. But what is quite likely that he wants to achieve a peace in Ukraine somehow. The question is at what costs. That might impose, if it really happens, maybe a start of or reduction of certain sanctions, or maybe also depending on the circumstances that Putin will not stop there and he's going to test also the strength of the NATO. And we see that maybe there will be a dispute within NATO. So that's something. I definitely see if the economic downturn of Russia will continue, that they will have much more attack on sea cables and gas plants. We have seen that with Estlink. There might be more attacks from Russia to that, so increase of hybrid warfare. So it will definitely mean a increasing volatility in gas prices. Nevertheless, we will also see that I think the US will use LNG exports as a political weapon, maybe, to impose certain thoughts from Russia. So we are going to export to you LNG, but you have to do this and this and that and that. And that's interesting, seeing energy or LNG as a weapon, maybe as a weapon for political instruments from Trump towards Europe.
Because historically, I mean, the position of Trump in his previous presidency, and also the position of the USA more generally, was take our gas, do not go for Nord Stream or Nord Stream 2, because that will become more dependent on Russia. Now, that's going to be an interesting play now when there is no Russian gas coming in, and I think using LNG, weaponizing the LNG supply is going to be an interesting move. I mean, how can that play out? Because we've got there's a limited amount of LNG terminals in Germany, isn't there? So,
but it's of course. But we are increasing the amount of LNG terminals. We have LNG terminals all over the place in Europe. They are running at lower capacities right now, so we still have the potential to increase the capacity. I don't think that we have a capacity issue. I rather think really that in the first election of Trump, in the first administration, he was a deal maker. And we do expect him to be the same right now. But what have you seen in the recent weeks? I think we are gone away from being a deal maker rather than
a troublemaker.
A troublemaker, or implementing his political thoughts into the worldwide landscape. Yeah, and this dependency we're having now on US gas, I mean, just speak about the Strait of Hormuz, and if there's an increasing conflict between US, Iran, and Israel or whatsoever, and we are closing the Strait of Hormuz, we cannot receive any LNG gas from Qatar anymore. And the only one which is really left a significant amount is the US, and then he has his political power to use energy as a weapon.
Absolutely, it's fascinating, Tobias, and I'd like to return to that subject another time on this podcast. But you also mentioned German industry, and German industry, is the backbone almost of European production of production across Europe. But we've seen a big downturn, certainly in energy demand from the sector, and also industrial production in Germany is falling. What are your expectations for this year and maybe into the coming years?
Well, there's hope and there's reality. Yeah, I hope that we might come back to this part where Germany has been famous with a lot of innovation, a lot of automation also. That is missing a bit, especially if we look into potential trade wars worldwide or within Europe. But I think the reality will be that we will see an increasing unemployment rate in Germany. That will reduce the domestic demand, and then we are having to start a spiral. Usually we had a very good social welfare system, which we still have, but somehow it must be financed. And here we have certain limitations in Germany right now. So I hope that we are going to pick up, but I think that it will be this year, which will be definitely the third or fourth years with an economic downturn in Germany. It never happened before since 1949, since the beginning of the German Republic.
And the other aspect, of course, with the Trump presidency is the tariffs and trade war factor, and the implication there, could be very negative for German car manufacturers, for example, and for German industry. I mean, you could see even a further downturn.
Absolutely. I mean, with the car manufacturing, there are maybe some house-made problems that we missed a bit. These electric vehicle development. We have been relying on a lot of where Germany was good in engineering engines, but an electric car, you are generating an entertainment package on wheels. And Germans are not really good in entertainment packages. So that's a bit of the issue, and we will see the implications. I mean, Volkswagen starting with that. And it's not only the car manufacturers. We have all the suppliers and the whole chain in that. And that's a very productive chain, which gave a lot of economic welfare to Germany. And here we see a certain downturn. It's not over. I think we can pick up, but maybe not in 2025.
Absolutely, and I think there's another factors here with the potential trade and tariff or trade war and increased tariffs. Is that could Europe be a dumping ground for cheap solar panels, cheap batteries, which could increase? Also, Germany hit the milestone of 100 gigawatts of installed solar capacity last year. Was it solar? Yeah, solar capacity. Yeah, and could that continue at an accelerated pace, which then would drive prices down further, potentially for industry as well?
Well, yeah, it could happen, but the problem is a bit that the industry needs to have a production, not only base load, but a continuous production somehow. And we have been speaking about this binary electricity prices. It brings electricity prices down in the time where we have the sun. But in combination with the missing backup capacities, it could also lead to certain price spikes again. And at least looking into our scenarios, it's quite interesting that the yearly average prices over the next years might not deviate that much, but the volatility within a year, meaning the seasonality of electricity prices, they are changing quite a lot. And we've seen that with these extreme price spikes, that certain industries had their issues there. So I think reducing grid costs and grid tariffs, and that is something which could help the industry much, much more than increasing a installation of renewable energies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll come to all these issues. I'm sure we'll talk before January 2026, Tobias, on this podcast. At least I hope so. But and I think the other factor is, of course, as you said, the gift from God, the weather. I mean, we should be praying that we don't have a beast from the east again, or a sustained period of very cold weather.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We had a discussion that the gas storage levels in Germany or within Europe have been decreasing quite significantly by the end of last year. And there was a fear that we have missing gas then for the upcoming second part of this winter. I don't see that really. Yeah, I mean, of course, a very long period of cold weather then might be an issue, but I don't see that. It could well be that.
Thank you very much to our guests, Katharina Johannsen and Tobias Federico, for their insights.